and he seemed normal and everything. I said yes, because I did. I needed a place to sleep and then to figure out where I was going to go and who I could stay with, maybe pay a little bit for rent. But what I was going to do, because my entire purpose was getting my son back. At no time did I ever look at this individual and think, boy, I'd really like to make out with him. That had nothing to do with it. I thought he was an interesting person. He seemed smart, and he thought I was funny. At least he laughed. And we kind of joked around, but I never had any intention of, quote unquote, hooking up with him or quote unquote having a one night stand. And that's not the kind of person that I was or that I am. The only time that I can think of where I actually picked someone out after meeting them and then made out with them, not planning to, but just sort of it happened, was when I met this one Iranian man who had a girlfriend from St. Andrews in Portland, Oregon. And that was back in 2004. It was a really strange and unusual situation. And it was pretty much the only time that happened. And then I continued to call him, and we talked for a little bit after that. I didn't know where it would go from there, but I have never been a one-night stand person. So anyone who would try to say that the date rapes that occurred by federal employees, that's what that was, or that's what I was doing, they're liars. And I don't have a problem with, I don't have like an internal psychological need to try to make myself sound differently than what I am. Like, I'm not trying to justify, I don't feel like a kind of shame or whatever to where I would want to say, oh, I really didn't have a one night stand, I was just raped. That's not why I would never falsely accuse anybody of a crime. I mean, especially something like that when they're not guilty. And I would not ever do that to just, I pretty much talk about what my motives are and why I have done one thing or not done another thing. So, when I was with James Cartwright, there was a little bit of physical stuff, but that's not why I went with him. I went because I thought I was going to sleep on the floor. That's where I'd been sleeping. I chose to sleep on the floor. I could have slept on the couch, but I slept on the floor because it was more comfortable to me from just having a flat surface, and on my tailbone and back and everything that were still sort of hurting. I slept on the floor at this one Navy hospital person's house or apartment. So I assumed that when I went with this individual with James Cartwright to his apartment, I just thought I was going to sleep on the floor. I didn't think that the hotel would have a couch or anything like that. And then he had me sleep in the bed with him. And so after that, I didn't ever hear from James Cartwright again. I basically got up in the morning. I believe I had a quick shower, tried to do my hair a little bit, and a little bit of makeup, but I didn't really have anything on me, and I felt really kind of disheveled I believe that I had gotten locked out, and I didn't have a place to stay that night, but my belongings were still over at the Navy hospital person's house. So I was still wearing the same clothes that I left the bar in, and it just felt kind of, gross. In that regard, of not having a new change of clothes. And then Chris Dabney said, if you need a place, actually, I don't know if he made the offer right away. I believe that I maybe went, I don't know if I went all the way back to Maryland to get some clothes at that time, and then I was still looking for a place, or if I didn't go back until I had a place, and I think that might have been the case. Possibly I just wore the same clothes and went to work. if it was work clothes. And I did have to work. I think I got up early in the morning and I went to work. So probably that's what happened. And then I think it was either that same day or maybe a couple nights after, but I think it was that same day because I still didn't have a place. No, it was later. I possibly still went back to Bethesda and found some place to stay, or maybe the door was unlocked. Trying to remember, because I don't think that it was the very next day that I then went with Chris Dabney. But maybe it was, because I can't remember where I stayed or where I would have stayed to have a roof over my head after that. So then I know that I went with Chris Dabney when he wasn't so drunk. He was still drunk, but not very much. Not like wasted as he had been the one time where I didn't go with him to his place. And he took me to his mother's apartment and said, well, his mother was on vacation or something. And he said that it was more private and it was I can't remember what they call them, sort of a townhouse, loft sort of thing in Washington, D.C. And so she wasn't there. I remember that for somebody who wore the same shirt almost every single day and worked at the Post Pub, he had an interest in the Wall Street Journal. I mean, at least she got the paper, she got the newspaper, and he looked at it. And I thought that was kind of interesting that his mom read Wall Street Journal. I actually had as well in Portland, Oregon. I subscribed to the New York Times and had a special delivery of the New York Times to my house when I lived on Hemlock Street. And I also bought the Wall Street Journal sometimes from the newsstand. And I just sometimes thought it was interesting, some of the articles. So I thought I remember one detail that I never forgot was the Wall Street Journal. That she read that. And which didn't totally surprise me because I had thought that he was fairly smart intellectually. And, you know, if that really was his mother, then it wouldn't surprise me that she was also intellectually high caliber. Not that having the Wall Street Journal means you are, because, I mean, who cares? There are all different kinds of possible indications that someone has an interest in one way or another, and it really doesn't matter. But when I went with him, I was definitely drunk and intoxicated because he bought me a couple of margaritas, and they were really heavy duty. They were very good margaritas. They had grenadine in them. I'd never had a margarita with grenadine before. And then all of a sudden, he was putting moves on me, and then what he said while it was happening was, "Here's another one in the hole." I remember feeling out of it at that point. Later, at different times, he's tried to offer disclaimers for why he said that. There really was no possible alternative interpretation than for what he said when he was doing what he was doing in the context of my having been date raped by a number of federal employees. Here's another one in the hole. So again, I was totally drunk, completely drunk. And I don't believe that he was as drunk at all. I don't believe he was incapacitated at all. Because he knew that I wouldn't go with him if he was, because I hadn't gone with him that one time. So that was another, basically, incident. And I basically did this whole play dumb thing again, and I felt very shocked by that remark, and everything happened. And then he said, "You're going to be my girlfriend." And then I thought that was really spontaneous. I mean, now I was his girlfriend. And he was sounded very determined and sure about the idea. I remember thinking, basically just the same thing, trying to convince myself that I could make this turn out normal. And I needed a place to work. I had to work. I also needed a place to stay. I didn't have any options. So then he said, "You can stay at my place. You can get your belongings, where are your things? You can get your belongings and you can stay with me." So that was when I was finally able to then pick up my belongings from Maryland, from the Naval Hospital person's house. Guard. He was a guard there. He was in the military in some way, and then he was a guard. So then I picked up my belongings and moved everything into Chris Dabney's apartment. Not his mother's house, his mother's loft, but his own apartment. And what he said is, "You can stay with me, but you have to sleep in my bed." So before I was always sleeping on the floor of people's houses. But before he said that, he said, "You're my girlfriend. Now I want you to be my girlfriend." And because, as I say, I was in a bad situation where I'm trying to make the most normal thing of it. I mean, I was attracted to him, in a sense, but it still doesn't excuse some of the things that were going on. And because I was trying to make this work out for my son, and I was desperate and in a very bad situation, I said, okay. And at that point, I had a place to stay, and I had an address to give CPS of where I was living. So then I gave them an address, and but I always gave them an address. I had given them an updated address when I was living in Maryland. So when I lived in Maryland with that naval guard, I gave CPS an address. They had an address of where to send documentation to 1 month earlier than when they sent it. They were always updated on my whereabouts. There was 1 week where they didn't know where I was, and that was when I was en route to the East Coast. So they made up a lot of lies about it, saying we didn't know where you were, but that was a lie. They always knew. And then I continued to work there at the Post Pub as a waitress. I did well enough. I made very good tips. I made much better tips there than anywhere else, and I was told because the minimum wage there is $2, and then a lot of people have more money to spend in Washington, D.C. I was taking home about $300 or so a night for 30 hours a week, or less. It was per night, so it was fairly good to money.